Defends its national emergency declaration with new illegal immigration numbers. It says proves the crisis is getting much worse. House Democrats struggle with anti-Semitism legislation as a controversial Muslim lawmaker stands defiant. One major European country begins a program to guarantee a basic income whether people work or not. We'll bring you there. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. It's Ash Wednesday, by the way, as several Republican senators abandon the president over his national emergency declaration at the border. The administration is unleashing a flood of statistics aimed at proving its case that the crisis not only exists, but is getting exponentially worse. We have Fox team coverage tonight. John Roberts at the White House with what the president is saying and doing on this signature issue and the political fallout from this vote. But we begin on Capitol Hill with Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel and immigration front and center on the Hill. Good evening, Mike.
Bret, good evening to you. Customs and Border Protection agents say the situation at the southern border is unsustainable and there's a major need for legislation. A message delivered loud and clear today on Capitol Hill.
This is not a manufactured crisis. This is truly an emergency.
Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen headlined a House hearing a day after Customs and Border Protection called the situation at the southern border at a breaking point. More than 76,000 migrants illegally crossed in February, an 11-year high. A more than 300% increase in the number of family units apprehended compared to the same time period last fiscal year. 70 large groups of 100 or more people so far this year, totaling 12,069 people compared to 13 groups in 2018 and only 2 in 2017.
As the Secretary of Homeland Security, I can no longer assure you of who is coming into this country. That is a direct national security threat.
Time and again, Secretary Nielsen backed President Trump's decision to go around Congress and build a border wall.
Have you advised the president on his emergency declaration?
What I have done is I've given him all the facts from the men and women working at the border.
But one California Democrat blasted Nielsen as uninformed after Nielsen said any migrant seeking asylum would not be turned away.
Either you're lying to this committee or you don't know what's happening at the border.
While migrants were the biggest issue, Nielsen also provided context about the amount of deadly fentanyl being stopped at the border.
ICE overall interdicted enough fentanyl last year to kill every American twice over.
That's
substantial amounts of fentanyl.
So, and that's enough to kill every single American?
Twice. Yes, sir.
It's amazing.
In the Senate Judiciary Committee, Chairman Lindsey Graham tried to drill down with the Customs and Border Protection Commissioner.
If we built barriers where barriers make sense, that would help.
Certainly.
If we change the laws that create this problem, that would help most of all.
Dramatically.
Doing nothing is not working. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Today, the Homeland Security Inspector General revealed he's looking into how the Trump administration is processing those seeking asylum and whether illegal immigrant parents were deported without their children. Acting Inspector General John V. Kelly says the Department of Homeland Security was not fully prepared for the administration's zero-tolerance policy. The House Homeland Security Chairman applauded the move.
I'm not surprised that people are looking at it. It's just that what I'm hearing today doesn't give me any comfort that we're any better off.
Also today, Senators Chuck Grassley and Dianne Feinstein asked the Health and Human Services Inspector General to investigate allegations of sexual abuse of unaccompanied minors. Bret?
Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thanks. President Trump is trying to rally Senate Republicans to his cause and prevent more defections over the national emergency declaration. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts has that part of the story now from the North Lawn. Good evening, John.
Bret, good evening to you. A number of the likely defectors on the Republican side of the aisle actually support the president strongly on border security. But when it comes to the White House trying to circumvent the congressional appropriations process, allies quickly become opponents. The Senate vote isn't expected for another 8 days, but the White House is putting the hard sell on Republicans.
A vote against the president's emergency declaration is a vote against border security. A vote against the president's emergency declaration is a vote to deny the real humanitarian and security crisis at our southern border.
If a vote were held today, the president would likely lose. 4 Republicans, Paul, Collins, Murkowski, and Tillis, have said they'll vote to block the emergency. Another 4, Alexander, Romney, Gardner, and Lee, might join with them. Rand Paul says they could ultimately get 10 or more.
My reason for speaking out now is that I think we all need to think this through before we get too far down the road.
While Democrats oppose the very idea of building a wall, the Senate Minority Leader insists this is about constitutional principle, not barriers.
The Founding Fathers' exquisite balance of power is now being attempted to be undone by President Trump. Members of both parties should come together and say no.
The White House has already said if a bill to block the emergency declaration lands on the president's desk, he will veto it. And he gets full support on that front from Louisiana Republican Senator John Kennedy.
That's why God made vetoes. I'm going to support the president. Using the national emergency was not my preferred option, but I think he's not exercising any power that Congress hasn't given him.
Congress would need a 2/3 majority to override a presidential veto. In the Senate, that's 67 votes. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham says the votes for an override just aren't there.
The president's won, and when he goes to court, he'll win because the court will say Congress did act. But they couldn't override his veto, so I feel good about what he's doing legally.
The White House insists the crisis is real and getting worse, pointing to an explosion of cross-border apprehensions this year.
76,000 illegal individuals came across our border just last month alone. That would fill MetLife Stadium. That is a massive number of people coming across our border. If that doesn't define crisis, I don't know what does.
The way the vote is shaping up, it looks as though both the House and the Senate will pass the measure to block the president's emergency declaration. The only question seems to be at this point, how many Republicans will defect to the other side, and will it be enough to potentially override the president's veto? If that happens, Bret, that would be a huge loss for him.
Big time. John Roberts, live at the North Lawn. John, thanks. House Democrats are running into more trouble than anticipated in passing a resolution to condemn the alleged anti-Semitic behavior of what has become one of their most troublesome new members. Correspondent Peter Ducey tells us where things stand tonight.
As Democratic leaders are struggling to answer questions of anti-Semitism within their ranks, Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar is struggling to answer questions about her beliefs.
Congresswoman Omar, it seems like there's some confusion among your colleagues. Are you anti-Semitic?
One of Omar's colleagues was more eager to answer questions.
You have some members who either repeatedly or individually continue to use anti-Semitic tropes, and I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say it's unknowing, then apparently we do need to put a resolution on the floor.
But a planned vote to condemn anti-Semitism was pushed and might not even happen this week.
We want to take a look at it, the anti-Muslim language, anti-racism, in general.
While Democrats add those things to a new resolution, Republicans are reminding constituents about Omar's anti-Semitic rhetoric.
Support for Israel isn't about the Benjamins. It's about the hearts and minds of the American people.
The president applied pressure on Twitter, posting, quote, "It is shameful that House Democrats won't take a stronger stand against anti-Semitism in their conference. But some Democrats believe the president is the problem."
There is not a rise of anti-Semitism in the House of Representatives. There's a rise of anti-Semitic behavior and activity and violence in the country.
And Speaker Pelosi might be powerless because Omar is being defended by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Unfortunately, you have a growing element within the Democratic Party that when AOC says that she's the boss, this is just another example that she actually seems to be the boss. It should be very easy for all of us to stand united, bipartisan basis, condemning anti-Semitism.
But will all Democrats support that in a rewritten resolution? That's the next question.
Congresswoman, would you support the resolution condemning all forms of bigotry?
After all this, Ilhan Omar might not even be named in this resolution inspired by things she said, because some Democratic lawmakers are now coming forward to say they think her safety could be threatened if she is specifically scolded. Bret.
Peter, what's the latest on the FEC complaint about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her chief of staff?
Bret, there hasn't been a fine and there haven't been any firings. There also has not yet been a comment by the FEC, and they say they're not going to comment until the complaint has been resolved, which means there hasn't been a resolution to this complaint filed by a conservative group that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's chief of staff may have improperly moved almost $900,000 from one kind of an account that requires a lot of transparency to another kind of account that does not, and that made political donations and political spending tougher to track. Bret.
We'll follow it. Either it happened or it didn't. Peter, thank you. Democratic Party officials have rejected requests from Fox News to moderate one of the Democratic presidential debates. Party chairman Tom Perez is citing a story in the New Yorker magazine referencing this channel's relationship with President Trump. The story alleges this channel has become a, quote, propaganda vehicle for the president. Perez said in a statement, Fox News, quote, is not in a position to host a fair and neutral debate for our candidates. Here is a statement from Fox News Senior Vice President and Managing Editor Bill Salmon. Quote, we hope the DNC will reconsider its decision to bar Chris Wallace, Bret Baier, and Martha McCallum, all of whom embody the ultimate journalistic integrity and professionalism, from moderating a Democratic presidential debate. They're the best debate team in the business, and they offer candidates an important opportunity to make their case to the largest TV news audience in America, which includes many persuadable voters. The U.S. trade deficit jumped to nearly 19% in December. The Commerce Department says that pushed the trade imbalance for all of 2018 to a decade-long high of $621 billion. The gap with China widened to an all-time record of $419.2 billion. Coming up shortly, I will talk about the state of the U.S. economy with FedEx Chairman and CEO Fred Smith. Stocks were off for the third day in a row today. The Dow lost 133. The S&P 500 dropped 18. The Nasdaq fell 70. It appears the denuclearization effort with North Korea may not be going in the right direction tonight. Not long after the Vietnam summit ended without an agreement, we are now learning the communist regime is rebuilding a rocket facility it dismantled last year. Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent Greg Palcott shows us the evidence tonight.
A new threat from North Korea, just days since the failed summit between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. According to officials and experts, satellite photography indicates rapid rebuilding at the North's Sohae satellite launching station around the time of the meeting, including construction at a launch pad for long-range rockets and a test stand for engines for ICBMs capable of hitting the U.S.
I would be very disappointed if that were happening. It's a very early report. We're the ones that put it out. But I would be very, very disappointed in Chairman Kim.
After the first Trump-Kim summit in June, Pyongyang partially dismantled the site. And at a September meeting with South Korean President Moon, the North Korean leader promised to take down the whole facility if they were satisfied with U.S. concessions. It's thought the rebuilding is either to have something to tear down if Hanoi worked, or to get ready for a launch if Hanoi failed.
It does mean that Kim Jong-un is continuing with insistence to maintain and improve his weapons capabilities.
This, as the UN said, food production in North Korea was the lowest last year in a decade. 11 million people are undernourished. And according to South Korean officials, the North's economy shrank last year by 5%. No wonder Kim Jong-un wants the U.S. to lift sanctions, and why the Trump administration could add more if the North doesn't denuke.
If they're not willing to do it, then I think President Trump has been very clear they're not going to get relief from the crushing economic sanctions that have been imposed on them, and we'll look at ramping those sanctions up, in fact.
President Trump added this today about North Korea. It's a very nasty problem there, but the relationship is good, and it'll ultimately get solved. Here's hoping. Bret.
Greg, thank you. A new and expensive social experiment is underway tonight in Italy. It involves an idea that has become an issue here in America as well, a guaranteed basic income, even for people who refuse to work. Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent Amy Kellogg shows us what's happening tonight from Milan.
La prima card. A campaign promise made by the populist government that has been taking shape amid some controversy over the last few months. A basic minimum income of $882 a month for each individual without a job or making less than $882 a month. Today, residents of Italy were finally allowed to apply for the handouts, but it's not meant to be open-ended welfare. There will be a team of navigators who will seek work for recipients. Not everyone is convinced, though, like this labor lawyer.
My main
concern is about the fact that it could be a disincentive for the people to search for a new job because of the fact that you receive a quite significant amount of money.
Job offers can be rejected twice. Third time, you are kicked off the program.
We must not expect too many different goals to be achieved by this measure. The priority of this measure is to give an income and a dignified standard of life to poor people.
The poverty level has been rising in Italy, which is currently in recession. The EU recently took issue with Italy over its spending habits, and some say the program isn't worth its estimated annual $8 billion price tag, and worry that it won't create jobs other than the army of navigators. Some estimate that more than 20% of Italy's economy is illegal, and there is concern that those working off the books may try to take advantage of the scheme, but the government is warning anyone caught doing that will face 6 years in jail. Bret?
Amy Kellogg in Milan. Amy, thanks. Up next, a disturbing revelation from a U.S. senator about what happened to her while serving in the Air Force. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 8 in Cleveland with the end of the General Motors assembly plant near Youngstown. The Lordstown facility is being closed after more than 50 years producing cars and other vehicles. Nearly 1,700 hourly positions will be eliminated. Fox 11 in Los Angeles, as Jeopardy host Alex Trebek says he has advanced pancreatic cancer, but he says he will beat it because he's under contract to host the show for 3 more years. Trebek made that announcement on a video today. And this is a live look at Chicago from Fox 32. One of the big stories there tonight, former Illinois Republican Congressman Aaron Schock has agreed to repay tens of thousands of dollars in taxes and donations from campaign committees in exchange for prosecutors dismissing his felony corruption case. Schock resigned from Congress in 2015 amid scrutiny of his spending, including redecorating his office in the style of the Downton Abbey TV series. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. A sheriff's official in Chicago says musician R. Kelly has been taken into custody at a hearing over unpaid child support. The spokeswoman says Kelly will not be released until he pays $161,000 he owes. This comes after Kelly's forceful denial during a CBS interview that he sexually abused women. Kelly is facing charges of assaulting 4 females, including 3 underage girls. Kelly cried during the interview and later turned very emotional when asked about the allegations he held women against their will.
How stupid would it be for R. Kelly, with all I've been through in my way past, to hold somebody, let alone 4, 5, 6, 50, you said. How stupid would I be to do that?
I didn't say you
That's
were holding.
stupid, guys.
I didn't.
Is this camera on me?
Yes, it's on.
That's stupid.
Kelly also says some people accusing him are after his money. A federal judge is saying that the Trump administration's decision to add a citizenship question to the 2020 U.S. Census threatens the very foundation of our democratic system. The judge ruled the question violates a constitutional requirement that the census count everyone in this country. He says evidence shows the question would result in a significant undercount of non-citizens and Latinos. No comment so far from the Justice Department. The Supreme Court will hear arguments on the census question in April and will issue a ruling this summer. A startling revelation tonight from one of the U.S. Senate's newest members. Arizona Republican Senator Martha McSally says she was raped while serving in the U.S. Air Force. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin has details tonight from the Pentagon. Good evening, Jennifer.
Good evening, Brett. The hearing took a shocking turn when Arizona Senator Martha McSally, who served in the Air Force more than 25 years, the first female pilot to fly in combat, made her own confession.
Like you, I am also a military sexual assault survivor. But unlike so many brave survivors, I didn't report being sexually assaulted. Like so many women and men, I didn't trust the system at the time. I blamed myself. I was ashamed and confused. I thought I was strong, but felt powerless. The perpetrators abused their position of power in profound ways. And in one case, I was preyed upon and then raped by a superior officer.
McSally was speaking at a hearing on military sexual assault and prevention.
Like many victims, I felt the system was raping me all over again. But I didn't quit. I decided to stay and continue to serve and fight and lead, to be a voice from within the ranks for women, and then in the House and now in the Senate.
A Pentagon report last year found 6,700 DoD employees reported being sexually assaulted, the highest number in a decade. A recent survey of military service academies found unwanted sexual contact jumped by nearly 50%. The Air Force issued the following statement, quote, "The criminal actions reported today by Senator McSally violate every part of what it means to be an airman. We are appalled and deeply sorry for what Senator McSally experienced, and we stand behind her and all victims of sexual assault." McSally's revelation comes just weeks after Iowa Senator Joni Ernst, an Army veteran, went public with her own story about being raped by a former boyfriend in college. Bret.
Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thanks. Next up, the U.S. economy, where it is and where artificial intelligence may take it. We will talk to one of the top CEOs in the world. First, beyond our borders tonight, Iran's president says there is no chance of negotiations or compromise with the U.S., allegedly because Washington is seeking to topple the government in Tehran. Hassan Rouhani says the U.S. wants Iran to go back to the way it was before the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The State Department says it is aware and deeply concerned about the detention of an American freelance journalist in Venezuela. WPLG-TV in Miami says reporter Cody Weddle and his assistant were placed in custody when Weddle's Caracas home was raided by police. The former chairman of Nissan Motor Company left a Tokyo detention center today after posting an $8.9 million bail. Carlos Ghosn wore a mask, cap, and what looked like a construction worker's outfit. He's charged with falsifying financial records and with breach of trust. He was arrested in November. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back. Tonight we're going to talk about the state of the U.S. economy, the economy around the world, and where it may be heading. Joining us this evening is FedEx founder and chairman, CEO Fred Smith. Fred, thanks for being here.
Bret, I'm glad to be here.
It's an exciting time for FedEx. You've just launched a new thing that's looking to the future.
Right.
Explain what that is.
Well, it's a bot. It's a robot, and it's able to make deliveries from stores to residences. And it's based on a wheelchair iBot developed by our friend Dean Kamen, the modern day, Thomas Edison of our time. So it's quite a device that can take something from a store, you order it, and it's at your house in 15 minutes for very, very low cost.
So you're starting the testing of that now?
We are. The reason we had to bring it out in the public was because it's now going to be tested on the streets, so we didn't want anybody to be startled by seeing a FedEx robot going down the street. So we'll begin testing on it here in a few months.
And how will that change your business, do you think?
Bret, it's really not the mainstream of our business. We move about 14.5 million shipments a day worldwide.
14.5 million a day?
A day. And this is sort of a new market, the same-day business. We have a same-day business that connects business to business, but we're not in the same-day business to consumer. And that's what this device is designed to serve.
I talked to you now 6 years ago. And I asked you about the state of the U.S. economy. A lot of people look to you because you kind of have a forecast ahead of when it is happening. You get a feel for how things are. Take a listen. This is what you said about what needed to happen to the economy back then in 2013.
I think the most important thing the United States can do to stimulate the economy is, number one, continue to promote production of U.S. energy. Second, we need to reform our corporate tax code. It's unfair, it's not productive. Most importantly, it dissuades capital investment.
So your thoughts now, 6 years later?
Well, as you've watched at a front row seat, we are now approaching energy independence in terms of petroleum. The tax code has been changed, and corporate investment, as predicted, has gone up significantly. So those have been very positive elements and among the key reasons that we're actually growing as an economy today.
Where do you see the economy? I mean, looking forward.
Well, the U.S. economy is pretty strong. The worldwide economy, not so much. We announced in December that we had seen slowing economic growth in Europe, and at the time a lot of people didn't really buy into that, but subsequent to that, almost every week there's another announcement. Germany slowing, Italy slowing, Brexit is creating a problem now because of the trade tensions, among other reasons. China is slowing a bit. So U.S. economy is strong. Worldwide economy not as strong as we'd like to see it.
You know, as we talked about the bot, there's a lot of concern about AI, artificial intelligence, what that means for jobs for Americans. How do you look at that?
Well, I'm on the optimistic side. You know, think back 80 years, the premier airplane in the sky, and the first airplane could make money on its own. The DC-3 could carry about 30 people, could go 1,500 miles. It could fly about 150 miles an hour. Next week, Boeing will roll out the 777-9. It goes 600 miles an hour, carries 420 people, and there are two pilots that can fly 7,500 miles, and most of the time the plane is flown by a robot. So, the autopilot. So, productivity is what's important.
We have a chart, I think, you could reference about labor force from 1840 to 2010. What do you see on this chart?
Well, if you were having this conversation 100 years ago, you'd be very concerned if you were an economist looking at the employment in the agriculture sector.
Which is the red line here.
That's the red line. It's about 35% of everybody worked on a farm. Today, there's less than 1.5% of the working people in the United States who work on a farm and produce more food than we know what to do with. The yellow line, of course, is what you do. It's a service business, or what I do. So all of the things invented between 1919 and today have led to this increased employment, and I think AI and robotics is going to be doing exactly the same thing. That doesn't mean it's a great thing if it's your job that's automated, like the farm equipment that displaced the people that worked in the fields. But for the economy as a whole, I don't think that we have anything to worry about. There's not going to be anything for people to do in a few years because of robotics and the AI.
The jobs may be different, but they'll be there.
100%.
Last thing, and I don't want to go too deep into politics, but we're starting this 2020 rollout. And you hear these things about the Green New Deal, about big spending packages. When you look at that landscape, what do you think?
Well, there are only two kinds of economies. Everybody makes this complicated. It's not. There's market-driven and there's government-directed. There is no example of a successful government-directed economy. None. And you can see it play out in Venezuela as we speak. You can look at the history of Chinese communism before they went into a market-driven economy. So they became one of the most prosperous countries in the world from just going from government directed to market driven. So I think that a lot of the rhetoric on the left will prove to not be very acceptable to the American public, and certainly history is not on their side to have that as a successful political philosophy.
You do $71 billion?
In our fiscal year that ends May 31st, we will be someplace between $70 and $71 billion in total revenue.
And you're bullish on the economy?
Yes, I think the U.S. economy is in pretty good shape. It's growing. I think the trade issue needs to be resolved in order to get the global economy growing again. There are billions of customers that are not in North America, so we need to get back to doing business with them.
Fred, we really appreciate your time.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Bret.
Can't wait to see that bot arrive on the door.
It'll be there soon.
All right. Government statistics may back up the president's ruling that there is a national emergency at the southern border. We'll find out what the panelists think when we come back.
When it comes to border security, what the American people have heard from the Trump administration is misleading at best. The president declared a non-existent emergency.
It is absolutely abhorrent that Democrats are still refusing to acknowledge the crisis on the border, particularly when Barack Obama himself even called it a crisis in 2014.
This is not a manufactured crisis. This is truly an emergency. As the Secretary of Homeland Security, I can no longer assure you of who is coming into this country. That is a direct national security threat. Make no mistake, this chain of human misery is getting worse.
The Homeland Security Secretary up on Capitol Hill today with a lot of stats. Total southwest border apprehensions, if you look at 2019, February, 76,103. You look back at the months and where that stands. The southwest border family unit apprehensions, 2019 so far, 136,000. There is 2018 total for the year, 107,000. It's obviously just March. Let's bring in our panel. Charles Hurt, opinion editor for the Washington Times. Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio. And Jonah Goldberg, senior editor at National Review. All right, Charlie, obviously these stats are pretty telling. The New York Times ran a front page piece saying that this, in fact, is essentially a crisis in its headline.
Yeah, and the numbers are particularly dizzying because there are just so many ways of measuring it. The one thing that I think is everyone can agree upon is that we do not have operational control of the border. The cartels are so in charge at the border. The human smuggling cartels are the same people that smuggle drugs across the border, and there are stories that we heard over the last couple of days of where the cartels will actually send groups of people that they're smuggling across the border in order to divert attention away from other areas of the border so that they can send the drugs, the more valuable drugs, across in other places and get the drugs safely into the country. It's pretty terrifying, and the idea that we're sitting here in Washington and arguing about whether this is a crisis or whether this is an emergency is, I think, pretty mind-boggling to regular Americans who are watching this, and they don't particularly aren't necessarily opposed to legal immigration, but they think that, gee, this is a real problem.
There were a number of points, Mara, that were kind of eye-openers in this hearing. One of them was a question about the fentanyl numbers, the drugs coming over.
ICE, overall interdicted enough fentanyl last year to kill every American twice over.
That's
substantial amounts of fentanyl.
So and that's enough to kill every single American.
Twice.
You know, we're not sitting here in Washington having a debate over whether to call it a crisis or to call it an emergency. The debate is about whether the president should be allowed to declare it a national emergency, which is a term of law, so that he can build a wall.
Well, I will say that some Democrats early on said there is no crisis.
Okay, that's a separate argument. Yeah, to say whether it's not a crisis or not. The border crossings at the borders have spiked. Apprehensions of drugs have spiked. The question is, what is the appropriate remedy? Congress had a big debate, and they passed a funding bill that included a lot of things, more detention beds, more this and more that, but they didn't give the president one thing that he really wanted, which is money for a wall, and now he's declared a national emergency so that he can spend unobligated Pentagon funds on a wall. That's what we're arguing about.
Yeah. Do these numbers, does this hearing change, do you think, the calculation for Republicans who say this is going to bleed into maybe a Democratic president who wants to say national emergency, do this?
I don't think so. I think these numbers don't change anyone's minds on Capitol Hill, I don't think. I kind of disagree with both of my colleagues here, though, I want to say, in that I think part of the problem is why we're arguing about a crisis. As you pointed out, the New York Times pointed out, there is a crisis at the border, but it's a humanitarian crisis. It's a huge humanitarian crisis because the nature of the kind of people who are trying to come across the border has changed over the last 10 years to be these families instead of single able-bodied Mexican men looking for work. And yeah, I agree there are a lot of anecdotes that are scary about drugs, but that's the problem, is that the Trump administration's case about why it is a crisis is sort of factually challenged. He wants to say it's basically an invasion of drug-dealing henchmen straight out of a Chuck Norris movie, when in reality it's a bunch of babies and kids and whatnot, and some cartels taking advantage of the chaos. And so you can't agree.
Or asking for asylum.
Or asking for asylum, which a wall would not stop. And so part of it is people are just talking past each other because they're defining crisis differently.
But it is important to remember that I agree it's a humanitarian crisis, but the way you fix the humanitarian crisis is you fix the flow, you stop the flow, and Democrats are absolutely, if you listen to these people running for the nomination, they do not believe that that's a problem.
A wall wouldn't stop someone from going up to a legal port of entry and turning themselves over as they are doing.
Okay, just because a wall isn't the only answer doesn't mean that it can't be part of the answer, and it's been a part of all the other successful efforts. And so do the wall and do other things, and do the thing about changing the the law so that you can actually detain families until you can turn them back.
Well, let's talk brass tacks about votes.
Yeah.
There are now 4 Republicans who say they're going to vote against this effort.
Not enough to override
but not
a veto.
enough to override a veto. However, there's up to 10, I guess, who are being talked about, but not enough, right?
No, and there won't be enough, and I don't think his veto will be overridden. So the point about this whole exercise is it's going to be decided in the courts, not on Capitol Hill.
And the message Congress sends factors into the courts?
I think it does. I think it's part of because the law is sketchily written and was partly vitiated by the court in the past. All of it gets going into play because it goes into the intent of what Congress wanted, what the president wanted.
But if they wind up not able to overcome the veto, then Congress will not have spoken according to the Constitution. But what does that matter?
Well, they'll have the votes that are on the record going in. All right, next up, why Democrats are having such trouble passing a resolution condemning anti-Semitism.
I thought was wrong and hurtful, but I also want to say that what happened linking all Muslims to the terrorist attack was wrong and hurtful, and both should be condemned.
In my opinion, I think you really need to remove Ilhan Omar from the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
I don't know that would do anything except exacerbate the situation even more. I'm looking to get rid of anti-Semitism, not looking to punish anybody.
Well, this probably wasn't on the planning for this week for Democrats to deal with and have a hard time passing an anti-Semitism resolution. The president tweeting out, "It is shameful that House Democrats won't take a stronger stand against anti-Semitism in their conference. Anti-Semitism has fueled atrocities throughout history, and it's inconceivable they will not act to condemn it." Well, the Washington Post reporter and many other people on Twitter took issue with that tweet, saying, "I try not to, quote, tweet the tweets so much anymore, but honestly, it was literally just 19 months ago that marchers in Charlottesville chanted, 'Jews will not replace us,' and then the president responded by saying there were people that were very fine people on both sides." So that is both sides on the Twitterverse. We're back with the panel. Mara, Democrats having a hard time getting their hands around this thing.
Because Democrats have a high standard when it comes to Me Too, when it comes to anti-Semitic remarks, and they also are driven absolutely bonkers when they feel that the president does not get the same kind of criticism that they do. But the point is, this criticism is internal. It's one thing to criticize the Netanyahu government or to say the policies of Israel are bad, but it's another thing to say that people who support Israel have an allegiance to a foreign government, which is a age-old anti-Semitic trope.
Opponents and Republicans mainly are saying that Omar should not be on the Foreign Relations Committee. Foreign Affairs Committee.
Well, first of all, obviously the global Jewish conspiracy is paying me to say what I'm about to say. But she shouldn't be. And also, look, I mean, this is sort of a minor point, but I find it vexing. Remember during the Black Lives Matter thing, when anybody said all lives matter, the immediate response from all of these people was, you are diminishing the specific complaints of this group and what they are talking about. The Democrats now are bending over backwards because they have to include anti-Islamophobic language. And you saw Chuck Schumer talking about, I didn't like the language about Muslims either. They are doing the exact same thing they called racist when people did it about Black Lives Matter, and it just shows you that the Democratic Party, this is a canary in the coal mine for the Democratic Party. They got this is going to be a problem of the Corbynization of the Democrats going forward for a while, and they better figure out how to deal with it now.
Corbyn, the opposition leader in London,
who loves the Jews.
Sarcastically. Charlie.
Yeah, I just have to correct one thing, though. Of course, when Donald Trump said there were good people on both sides, what he was talking about was in Charlottesville there were good people on both sides of the debate about whether or not to take down the Lee statue from Lee Park in Charlottesville, which is not the same as...
it was interpreted differently. He had a lot of walk back during that time.
Okay,
I got it.
But it's an important distinction.
Which he could have made.
Yes, which he could have made.
It's Donald Trump. The President Trump has got...
See, that's what drives Democrats nuts. Okay. Donald Trump has one standard and they have another, which they should. They should have a higher standard.
But it is enjoy. This is a little bit like Richmond, watching Democrats who have very much been it's been very in vogue among them to play these identity politics to wind up with this. Whether Ilhan Omar, what she's saying, what's in her heart, I don't know. She sounds more dumb than anything else.
Why couldn't you just say no?
Exactly.
No.
Pretty simple.
And then I'll move on. I'm not sure.
She already apologized for a previous. This is not the first time she said something like that.
Or the last. 3. Yeah. Panel, thanks. When we come back.
When it comes to border security, what the American people have heard from the Trump administration is misleading at best. The president declared a non-existent emergency.
It is absolutely abhorrent that Democrats are still refusing to acknowledge the crisis on the border, particularly when Barack Obama himself even called it a crisis in 2014.
This is not a manufactured crisis. This is truly an emergency. As the Secretary of Homeland Security, I can no longer assure you of who is coming into this country. That is a direct national security threat. Make no mistake, this chain of human misery is getting worse.
The Homeland Security Secretary up on Capitol Hill today with a lot of stats. Total southwest border apprehensions, if you look at 2019, February, 76,100